Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. A little bit of a different show this evening because we've got two segments that are really about the same thing, but really about a core issue in the borough of the Bronx, and that is finding creative ways to do development, to do advancement of our properties, of our land, which you could see behind me, but do it in a way that incorporates the people of the Bronx, that is effective in developing the Bronx without hurting the Bronx, and kind of doing the right things. We all know what in the Bronx we've been through over many years and decades of development happening without our input, and then all of a sudden we don't like what we see and it hurts our neighborhoods. You get it. Let's say hello to Mary Alice Lee, who's the Playgrounds Program Director of the Trust for Public Land. Nice to see you, Mary Alice.
Hello there.
Nice to have you with us. Let's just talk about the Trust for Public Land and this whole a playgrounds program, and then we're going to talk about what I think is so exciting in our borough of the Bronx.
That sounds great. Thanks for having us tonight. Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit organization, and we work to connect everyone with the outdoors by preserving land and creating parks. And in the New York City, we have designed and built over 230 playgrounds on schoolyards across New York City in the 5 boroughs. And we started this work in the late 1990s when there was not a lot of park space available for kids. And through the years, we've worked on this very special program where we've been able to transform asphalt schoolyards into really beautiful school and community playgrounds that are designed by the students and the community.
And so in terms of the ownership of those properties, explain to me how it works and how the Trust for Public Land gets a chance to do these kinds of things.
We're so fortunate to have a public-private partnership with the City of New York, where TPL will go into and work with schools that are have these asphalt lots, and we work closely with the students, the administration, and also the community members to talk about what they'd like to see in the yard. We have a whole curriculum where we really create sort of mini landscape architects out of the students. We talk about the existing conditions, what they're doing in the yard now, what they'd like to be able to do.
And let me just interject then. So therefore, the students get to have some input into what's going to be in their schoolyard.
That's right. We think that the users of the park should be the designers of the park. You know, they're the experts. We want to make sure that we're putting in things that they're going to use for recess, for after school, and also the community can use on the weekends.
Are you ever surprised at some of the things that people suggest, or is it really, well, I pretty much know what they're going to say anyway, because everybody says the same thing?
You know, we definitely...
I'm sorry, I had to ask that question. Because sometimes people in the Bronx come up with stuff, and I want to know what it is.
You know, kids really there's a lot of responses for chocolate fountains, and we unfortunately...
Excuse me, chocolate fountains?
Yes. And unfortunately, we cannot add those to the playground.
Why the heck not?
Also, I remember...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, of course. One time a kid wanted a petting zoo. And so we talked about the fact that we couldn't add that, but maybe we could do a wildlife viewing area. So we, made sure to add a butterfly garden. So we try to work with the kids and talk about what's realistic.
Or recommend and take them to the Bronx Zoo where they could have their fill. Wow. And so that, I asked the question, not really knowing what might come up, but that is so interesting. And of course, kids will be kids.
Yes.
And say that. And so you and others go into schools and work with teachers and families and all that. Oh, I did not know that. I'm so happy to hear that. So let's see, we have an opening celebration for a new community schoolyard at the Bronx School of Young Leaders at PS 306. What neighborhood is that?
So that's right by sort of like it's sort of like the West Farms neighborhood.
West Farms.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now Anderson, our producer, has some before and after. So let's take a look. I want to show people, because we all have been through this in the Bronx. I want to show you what it used to look like and what Mary Alice and her colleagues have transformed it. So Anderson, what do you got? Show us something. Okay. So this is what?
This is Or a picture, yeah. So this is what the kids were playing in before the intervention, and there were a lot of cracks and in the asphalt, and now. So it's an artificial turf field that actually collects stormwater, so there's less flooding and also less puddles on the yard. There's artwork that's designed by the students. There's a green roof gazebo, which is nice and cool to sit underneath. That's really popular.
Wow.
Parents. There's trees. There's an outdoor classroom. There's basketball courts. There's a really large running track, and it's a really fun place to spend time.
Where did the funding come from? You got to ask that question. Where does the funding come from?
Sure. Chester Public Land has to work together with our city agencies, and also in this case, the federal government, to gather funds to make this happen. So we're really fortunate to work with Fordham University, who helped us get funding from the Bronx Borough President, from the council member, Sanchez. And then also we got some federal funds through Richie Torres, and we were so grateful for being able to compile all those pieces together, along with our regular funding from the Department of Environmental Protection, which helps fund the green infrastructure work.
About how many of these, now of course I'm concerned about our home borough of the Bronx, but how many of these do you do, whether in the Bronx or elsewhere? Just give us an idea of the scope of it, because boy, if we could do this everywhere, in as many places as we can, I think we'd all, all those people who live in these buildings you see behind me will do a lot better. So give me an idea, if you would, about the scope of the schoolyard project.
Sure. We've opened up 232 playgrounds around the city of New York, putting over 4 million people within a 10-minute walk of one of our playgrounds.
Wow, that is really exciting. Now I know why you're smiling broadly. Gee, I hate to ask a political question. Are you concerned about the funding in the future from the federal government with the new administration? I guess we'll all have to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, this is something that transforms all political lines. These are, really great spaces for the kids to be able to play in. And it's a great resource for the community after school and on weekends. Right. So I think that, it's an important resource for everyone. So
so you think kids playing in a nice place to play is not a political issue?
I hope not.
I'm saying that sarcastically. Okay, we've got another before and after. Anderson wants to show us something before. Okay, so this is yet another very common looking playground in the Bronx.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we were. It was asphalt, and so then we were able to transform it again through that design process with the students and the community, and put in play equipment. Again, that turf field, which is great multi-purpose field, so that kids can play soccer, football, just run around and play tag. And it's great to have climbing equipment for them to exercise.
If I saw that correctly, like the first time around, it looked like there was like a little track around it as well. Which is great. And then the kids can have races. I mean, what's easier to do with kids to get them active than to say, you be the first one to the fence. So what is the next step? Like at this point, do you have plans for other schoolyards? Do you look at other schoolyards and say, we can do something with this? Or do people come to you and say, hey, what about my schoolyard? What is the process specifically so that the people of the Bronx, parents especially, who are watching can say, oh, I've got this big asphalt playground. It would be great if my kids really had something that was not just hot in the summer, but actually provided some relief in all ways.
Yes, I agree. I think every child, deserves a safe place to play and a beautiful place to play. And so TPL uses GIS mapping to determine which neighborhoods are most in need of recreation space. And then we go to those schools and work with them. We have to, come up with the funding. And then we also really want to work with schools that are interested in having the community come and use it after school and on weekends as well, because we are using public funding to build them.
What is the cost for I don't know, for one of these? I realize they all would be different depending on what kind of amenities you want to have in there and the size and everything else. But just give me give us all some framework for that.
Sure. For about an acre schoolyard, it's roughly about $2.5 million. And so that includes the design and construction. And
yeah. Well, I really hope that you do more in the Bronx. Am I allowed to ask if there are any ones in the future in our home borough of the Bronx that are coming up?
Yes, we're actually just beginning construction on the Forest Avenue campus at IS 184. So that'll be open next year in 2025.
So how long does it take usually to do these things?
So usually our process is it's about 1.5 to 2 years from the beginning of design till it's open to the community.
Wow, that is absolutely extraordinary. Do you always have to have, in other words, you talked about Richie Torres and the borough president making, contributions, coming up with funding. I guess that's part of the process. So you identify a school, what was the number of the one you said on Forest?
IS 184.
So IS 184, off the top of my head, I don't know who the elected officials are. Then you go through this whole process, right?
Yes. Yeah, and we're fortunate to work closely with the school construction authority that really helps us through the process as well. And so they help fund as well as really, cobbling together all these resources. So, green infrastructure funding from the Department of Environmental Protection. And then we're so grateful to particularly Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson, who has given us a lot of funding over the years for these spaces, because she recognizes how important they are for the kids and for the community.
It's not only, I can appreciate that any borough president should do that kind of thing, but I know Vanessa Gibson has made a very direct point. When the study of bus stops, hot bus stops came out, she was very strong to say that we don't have canopies, we don't have green spaces. And then, of course, you could trace that to various health issues, et cetera, et cetera. So this certainly makes sense. Mary Alice Lee, the Playgrounds Program Director for Trust for Public Land. Anything else you want to just let the public know? Maybe you should let them, principals and parents, know who to contact when they see this show and they're going to say, oh, we could use that. Like, what do they do to
Yeah, the best thing to do is to reach out to your city council person or your borough president, Vanessa Gibson, and they'll help.
And say that you saw this segment on the Bronx Buzz on BronxNet, and you like the idea of transforming your school's playground. Mary Alice, you are saving lives. You are creating vistas. You are creating beautiful spaces for our children. And boy, oh boy, in the boogie down Bronx, there's probably nothing more important than that. We really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to spend time with you.
Great. Okay, we're going to take a short break. And very interestingly, as I said at the top of the show, we're then going to speak with folks from the New York City Community Land Initiative doing similar kinds of things. In this case, it'll be in the South Bronx and our waterfront. Don't go away. Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. As promised, we talked about the Trust for Public Lands in our first segment, but now we've got the new economy project and a look at how to really do the right thing in the South Bronx on our waterfronts. It's been an ongoing dialogue for generations. So let us welcome from the New Economy Project. It is Will Spisak. He's the Senior Program Associate. Will, nice to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
And then our buddy, who's the Senior Organizer for South Bronx United, is Matthew Shore. What a excellent last name, considering what we're working on. His last name is Shore. Was that deliberate, or it just worked out that way?
I like to think it worked out that way.
Oh, okay. Because, you know, like my last name is Axelbank, and I really have nothing to do with the financial industry. So there you go. Anyway, Will, let's just talk about the new economy project. And what you do and why this particular project is blood and guts core for what you guys do.
Yeah, for sure. So New Economy Project, we're a citywide organization. We've been around for 30 years, and our mission is to build a new economy that works for all New Yorkers based on principles of cooperation, racial justice, and economic justice, and ecological sustainability. So we have a fight and build strategy that we've been implementing for
and build?
Fight and build. Yeah. So
fight and build.
Yeah. So we fight against extractive wealth practices, debt collectors, big banks, the industries that have redlined Black and brown communities for decades. And while we're fighting against those institutions through our legal team, through our organizers and our campaigns, we also have a build strategy where we try and build new institutions that are rooted in neighborhood equity, that are led by community members directly, and implement economic democracy on the ground. So one of the tools that we use to build this new vision of a new economy is called a community land trust. And a community land trust, or a CLT, is an organization that seeks to take land off of the speculative market and hold it in perpetuity for the benefit of the community, and doing this to, allow for the development and preservation of deeply affordable housing, community space, commercial space, and important for this conversation, green space, particularly in neighborhoods that have been neglected by the city in terms of accessing, equitable green space.
I'm still focused on the notion of fight and build, and having been a talk show host in the Bronx for 3 decades. This is core. This is right at the center of, I can't even tell you how many times I've had a dialogue on television about exactly those kinds of issues. This is core for us. Now, who do I need to ask about NYCLI, which is the New York City Community Land Initiative? Do you deal with that, Will, or is that so? Why don't you start and tell us about that? And then I'm going to bring in Matthew Shore. Ironically, is going to talk about the shore in the South Bronx.
Yeah, so we actually call it Nicely.
Sorry.
Yeah, so New York City Community Land Initiative. So that's a coalition that our organization, New Economy Project, helped to found, and we facilitate and coordinate the coalition. It's a coalition of community land trusts from around New York City. So currently we have about 20 or so community land trusts. These are neighborhood-based organizations that are grassroots-led, that are bringing community members together to identify land that could be stewarded by the community for the benefit of the community. So we have groups in all 5 boroughs. We have groups in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, Queens, that have identified either public land or land that they are interested in acquiring and taking off of the market so that they can maintain that property for the long-term benefit of the community. And South Bronx Unite and the Monhaven Port Morris Community Land Stewards are a member of Nicely, and they're doing tremendous work to advance this kind of vision for the South Bronx.
Last question for you, then I'll bring in Matthew. How new is this concept? I hadn't really heard about it. It's probably had been out there, people were thinking thinking about it. Maybe we ought to do this. But recently it's come to the fore that people are turning to these kinds of arrangements when they have properties or buildings or other situations that they can't figure out because the powers that be are just not letting it happen. So now they're looking to own kind of themselves. How new is this, or has this been around a while?
Yeah, we have a really exciting and growing movement here in New York City that's relatively new. But the idea of a community land trust is not new. In particular, the CLT model was developed during the civil rights movement, actually by Black farmers in the South that were consistently being excluded from accessing good land that they can live on and sustain themselves with. So they formed community land trusts to pool their resources and formed the first community land trust in Albany, Georgia. And then eventually that model migrated to the cities where communities were experiencing gentrification and higher rents and displacement. And they were able to then use this same model to take
address those kinds of things. All right, absolutely. Matthew, let's stop. Let's get you involved here. The dialogue about the waterfront, the South Bronx waterfront, goes on. What are the issues that are important to you, and how can this process address those issues, and what are you hoping to see?
Right. So our community land trust, the Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards, is actively organizing residents in the South Bronx, specifically in the Mott Haven Port Morris neighborhoods, who are most impacted by how public land in the neighborhood has harmed them and not benefited them. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a lack of access to our waterfront on the peninsula that we live in, which is mostly comprised of publicly owned land. The community came together years ago.
Excuse me. So let's just talk about the irony of that. So we, meaning the general public, doesn't have access to public land that is on the waterfront of the South Bronx. That doesn't work. I mean, if it's public land, well, then the public, I mean, I'm not speaking out of turn. It just doesn't make sense. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
Right. And the community agrees with you, Gary. So that's why they formed this community waterfront plan to change that. They want access. They want, the ability to have more green spaces and trees in a neighborhood that is suffering from the highest rates of asthma and air pollution, not only in the city and state, but in the nation. So this waterfront plan is about access, creating more green spaces for better health outcomes, and also with addressing the high risk of flooding in our area. So we recently applied for an EPA community change grant from the Inflation Reduction Act to be able to not activate the entire waterfront because that's costly, around $125 million we're talking about, but to apply for $20 million to activate to begin activating one to two different parts of the waterfront.
Well, I want to ask you, let me just ask you before we run out of time, let me ask you about the Heart Center. Heart, which I loved, health, education, and the art. This has been a vision for a number of people in the South Bronx for a long time. Talk to me about the Heart Center, what it is, and what your hope is ultimately.
Yes, so we invite people to, visit our website, southbronxunite.org, to learn more about the Heart Center. It's an amazing project. We're opening a new community center in 2027 that
I'm
is
going
right
to be
in the middle.
applauding while you talk. Go ahead. I think it's
that's
wonderful.
right. Yes, that's right in the middle of Mott Haven, right next to Mott Haven houses and close to Patterson houses. And it's going to be a part of our community land trust and managed by community members, truly a grassroots project. And, this building used to be the former Lick Recovery Center, which, from the 70s to pretty much close to 2010 was offering holistic health services, many of which were pioneered by the Young Lords and leaders like Dr. Mutula Shakur, who brought things like acupuncture to communities suffering from drug addiction. And it was an amazing facility. And then, unfortunately, the building closed around 2012, 2013.
I just want to move it ahead. So then a nice way of it emerging in the modern era is to have this Center for Health education and the arts, right? I mean, that's what we're saying. The legacy of it is strong in this direction.
Absolutely. So we're excited about that. We're going to be teaming up with Green City Fours, partners like Upbeat NYC, and bringing holistic health services to a community that so desperately needs it.
And then you also have the Mott Haven Port Morris waterfront plan, and that is what you originally started talking about, because if it's public land, let's make it used by the public, for the public, et cetera, right? I mean, I'm putting words into your mouth, but I know you feel that way.
Yes, public land for public good. And I mean, this ties back to the work that our coalition at Nicely is doing. We're advocating for what's known as the Community Land Act, which, you know, includes important bills before the city council, like public land for public good. So, you know, this bill is something that would, when the city disposes of public land, would prioritize community land trusts like the Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards for first priority to be able to acquire that land for community benefit.
Yep, certainly makes sense. Will, just about a minute and a half left. I'm going to make a judgment here, and you tell me if I'm wrong. The Bronx and the South Bronx and these projects are core exactly what the new economy project should be about. In other words, when you think about what we're doing and what we need to address, where else? Right there in the South Bronx, right? I mean, this is what it's all about.
Absolutely. And we're so happy that we have groups like South Bronx and Mott Haven Port Morris Community Land Stewards that are leading this work on the ground. And hopefully we're going to get those bills passed and make it easier for new groups to implement their visions for their community.
If there are people, and I know in the Bronx there are people who say, you know what, this is a great concept. And for example, in my neighborhood, I've got this problem. Or on, you know, people in the East Bronx may say that about their waterfront. People in Soundview have a waterfront that they also feel have not been handled properly. Who do they contact? What do they do? And how do they get involved in developing? Because it takes time developing this kind of thing.
Yeah, they could definitely reach out to us at New Economy Project. You can find us neweconomynyc.org, or reach out to South Bronx Unite. We have a Green Space Equity Coalition that's meeting regularly to help groups plan for projects like that. So we'd be happy to connect and help anyone who has a vision for their community.
That's what they're about. Listen, Matthew, you got to say hello to my buddy Michael Johnson and all my friends down there in the South Bronx who have been just never giving up, always fighting for justice, for racial justice, for environmental justice, and really just to have, you know, develop our own land for ourselves. I think it's great, Matthew. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yep, great. Folks, that will do it. There you see a new way to develop the Bronx. We do it with Bronx communities. Nobody could be more enthusiastic about it than me. And that will do it. So we thank both Matthew and Will, and we thank Mary Alice Lee from the Trust for Public Land in our first segment. And you know what we say, if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week. Good night.